I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not the one who's not afraid, but the one who conquers that fear. I still remember the first words my father told me, quoting Nelson Mandela the first time I visited him in jail. I am here with all of you to speak about the story of a man who 2 years ago sacrificed his freedom for his democratic beliefs, and the story of a country that even in the darkest of our moments, we have never lost the ability to dream of freedom. The past 19th of February of 2015, my father, Antonietta Ledezma, the former mayor of Caracas, was abruptly and arbitrarily arrested by 120 police armed men who showed up in his office, came without a warrant for his arrest, without any sort of explanation to us, his lawyers, why were they taking him, the reasons of his detention. And for the longest hours of my life, I didn't know whether my father was being tortured, whether my father was alive, or what was his situation. It wasn't until a year later in which he had his first preliminary hearing in where he received the unfair and political charges of conspiracy and criminal association, and also the possibility of ending up in jail for 26 years. He's the only mayor of the world who today is arbitrarily and illegally arrested. And it's been 2 years since, as the daughter of a political dissident, I've learned to transform this fear into courage. Because today I cannot only talk about Antonietta Ledezma, I cannot only talk about one political prisoner. That would be selfish. I am here talking on behalf of more than 100 courageous women and men who are today illegally and arbitrarily behind bars for unmasking Maduro's regime. Because Nicolás Maduro, the man we have to call president in Venezuela, is a man who has destroyed my country, a man who has violated all democratic and human rights principles to maintain himself in power, a man who has led us to the worst humanitarian crisis in our history. Because today, as I am speaking to all of you, my people, the Venezuelans, are dying of hunger, are dying in our hospitals, are dying in our streets due to the lack of food, medicine, and the lack of security. And that's the reality of my country. That's the real face of Maduro dictatorship. Because it doesn't matter if he wants to silence us by putting us behind bars, if he wants to silence us by oppressing our press, one of his last measures of taking out the signal of CNN, because if I can reassure all of you something, is that every authoritarian government is terribly afraid of information. Seeing my father in jail and now with house for arrest is the hardest experience I've ever had to live through. The government has turned my house into a prison. We have 30 policemen constantly watching us, constantly recording all of our conversations and treating us like if we were criminals. Twice a day, or sometimes more, they photograph my father, making sure he hasn't escaped. And in each knock of our door, we feel the constant fear of not knowing if that's the moment they're going to take him back to jail. He's not allowed to look through the window. Actually, when it was his second anniversary, he looked through the window, and we don't know if he's going to be sanctioned for that. So until today, he hasn't had a sentence or the chance to defend himself, because in my country there is no state of law or any sort of separation of institutions. In the last 2 weeks, as Jared mentioned, we have received the support of the White House, and more than 20,000 mayors all around the world has demanded the release of Antonietta Ledezma. This past Sunday, in his second anniversary, the Parliament did an historic session on the street, asking for the immediate release of my father. stating that as the mayor elected and re-elected and the second civil authority of my country, he needed to go back to the streets to work for his people and to work with his people and go back to his political situation. Real leaders must be ready to sacrifice all for the freedom of their people. And I grew up listening to this from my father, but I never really understood the real meaning until I saw him sacrifice his freedom 2 years ago. I would like to share a segment of one of my favorite letters he wrote when he was in jail. Today, I feel more than ever firm and willing to persist in this fight for liberty. I am both mentally and spiritually prepared to withstand the infamy and misery of being unfairly put in jail. For me, prison is a non-transferable experience, because when you surrender your will for a just and noble cause, the strength to keep your head and your principle up high is renewed. I cannot assure you that our victory in Venezuela will come tomorrow or next month, but we can affirm that freedom triumph is today closer than ever. Now, I want all of you that when you live here and you think about Venezuela, think about Antonietta Ledezma, think about more than 100 political prisoners, and think about Venezuelan people who are suffering today. I want you all to put a face to my father, to my country, and to the bravest man I've ever met in my life. Thank you.
Pelearon nuestros padres libertadores, este país inmensamente rico tenga que ver a su pueblo peleando por un paquete de harina o por un pote de leche. Pues bien, es la hora de la dignidad, es la hora del coraje, es la hora del civismo. Aquí no vengo a tomarme una fotografía, aquí vengo a decir presente y consecuente con un pueblo por el que vale la pena luchar.
Pero Maduro está aquí y va a seguir aquí, caballero, porque aquí no hay revocatorio. Ni por las buenas ni por las malas vendrán más nunca Miraflores, ni con votos ni con balas.